My name is Maya Jennings. I'm a games major, and this is my DVAP project for visual rhetoric. I'm going to talk about how the game industry was able to change their perspective and switch from 2D to 3D graphics to create worlds very like our own. Humans have always wanted to capture the beauty of the world they see. Artists have always tried to mimic the world around them, to be the ones to capture the beauty of the moment through their artwork. From the impressionism to modern artists in the game industry are no different. The game industry from the beginning of its creation wanted to emulate our world through its graphics, first through 2D graphics and later through 3D graphics. Both 2D and 3D graphics still play a major part within the industry. Since we live in a three-dimensional world, games have always wanted to create 3 dimensions for the player to explore, but due to the limit in technology, they had to find other ways to produce this effect. In the early games, game artists used both 2D and 3D elements to create a 3D-like effect. The start of the industry, 1950s and 60s. 1958, Tennis for Two was considered one of the earliest video games, maybe even the first, since it was one of the first video games. The graphics in Tennis for Two were very simple. Lines to represent a tennis court and a dot to represent the ball. Space Force, 1962. Space Force used simple graphics to create 2 spaceships. It was one of the first top-down view video games. Top-down view can give the illusion of 3D to 2D games by layering graphics on top of one another. The golden age of video games, 1970s and 80s. Maze Wars 1973 was considered one of the first-person shooters using vector lines. Vector lines are lines created by mathematical formulas using points and grid instead of raster graphics pixels. Vector lines were used for a little while until 3D polygon graphics, which are a type of vector graphics, were used starting in the 80s to create 3D graphics. 1976 Adventure, also known as Colossal Cave Adventure, is a text-based adventure game that uses cardinal direction, north, east, west, and south, along with basic commands, look, take, open, close, etc., to have players explore the world they find themselves in. Since this is a text-based game, the designers had to use words to paint visuals in the player's mind. Space Invaders was one of the early video games that used 2D graphics, released in 1978. 1980, Mystery House was the first adventure game to have computer graphics. It took inspiration from Adventure. Hubert was released in 1982 and was a 2D platform that was one of the first to use an isometric view to make 2D graphics have a 3D look. Up until the major switch from 2D to 3D games in the 80s and 90s, games cameras were static, which limit the player's view. Even though games were supposed to be 3D, this limited view made it feel 2D. The rise of 3D graphics, mid-80s to 90s. During the 80s and 90s, 3D graphics was considered low poly. A polygon is a bunch of 2D shapes put together to create a 3D shape. iRobot in 1984 is considered one of the first use of 3D polygons graphics in real time, and also is considered one of the first true 3D graphic video games. 1992 Wolfenstein 3D was one of the first series to fully embrace the shifting from 2D to 3D graphics. 1996 Super Mario 64 was one of the games that helped change the idea that video games were most suited for 2D graphics. This was a major change for the Mario franchise because it was mostly known for 2D platformers. It helped change the course of 3D platformers. Mario 64 was one of the first games that allowed players to control the camera independently from the character. This allowed a greater sense of exploration because players could fully control where they wanted to look instead of being forced to look in one direction at a time. This showed players how to see game worlds from a new perspective. 2000s to present day. During the 2000 high poly count became a standard for AA games because high poly count allowed game designers to create more realistic games. This could be seen in character models, environments, and props. In 2002, Legend of Zelda Wind Waker was one of the first games to use cell shading. Cell shading allows game developers to create a stylized look without creating overly complicated 3D models. Many large companies have made the switch from 2D to 3D. Nintendo is one of the best examples to showing the switch by creating rich 3D worlds. The game industry has come a long way from 1958 Tennis for Two in the terms of graphics. As humans, we gravitate towards what is familiar to us. Since we live in a 3D environment, it would make sense that we would like to see other worlds that are similar to ours in our video games. 3D graphics gives a way to create an environment that we feel like we are walking into instead of forcing different perspective to get that feeling. 2D graphics. Artists in the game industry and the University of Utah learn how to create both 2D and 3D graphics. As an artist, it is important to play to your strength while also giving yourself the chance to explore and be creative.